The first thing I saw was a gloved hand sliding my son's bedroom window open. No knock, no announcement, just the slow, deliberate movement of someone who thought they belonged there. My heart stopped. Ethan's eyes were wide, his little hand hovering over the panic button we drilled him to use. Outside, two more figures in gray HOA security jackets moved across the yard like they owned it. No badges, no warrants, just bold, practiced intrusion. In that moment, I knew this wasn't about a fence violation or some lawn complaint. This was something darker, and it had just crossed my line. If you want to know how I turned the tables on them, and what happened when they realized they picked the wrong house, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss the full story. If you told me 5 years ago that I'd be the one taking down a fake neighborhood security ring in a quiet Texas suburb, I would have laughed in your face, handed you a cold beer, and told you to quit binging late-night crime shows. But life has a way of slamming you with plot twists you never saw coming. Mine started with something so small I almost ignored it, a flicker in my backyard. We'd moved to Cypress Hollow 2 years back. Me, my wife Claire, and our two kids, Ethan, 6, with a mind that could build spaceships out of Legos, and Rosie, 3, who thought every stray cat was a long-lost friend. After 12 years in the Air Force, 5 of them overseas, I wanted one thing: stability. The kind of life where the grass is always trimmed just right, sidewalks feel safe under bare feet, and you know the names of the folks who wave when you grab the mail. Cypress Hollow sold that dream perfectly. Gated entrance, glossy brochures promising elite security, quiet streets, neighbors trimming roses in the evening sun, barbecue smoke drifting over white fences. And for a while, it was exactly that. Then little things started creeping in. Not enough to call the cops, but enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. One night, around 2:30 a.m., my backyard motion lights kept clicking on, not randomly, not like a raccoon nosing around, but in perfect intervals, like someone testing them. The next morning, I checked the cameras. No person, no animal, just a brief flash of light, then a shadow, long, narrow, moving across the yard, a shadow that didn't match anything I knew. 2 days later, I found a note in the mailbox. No return address, no signature, just, "This property feature has not been approved. Consult HOA guidelines regarding recreational structures." Stapled to it was a grainy photo of the new playset I'd built for Ethan over the weekend. I shrugged it off, some clipboard-wielding HOA board member with too much time on their hands. But then another note came, this time about the non-compliant paint color on my shed. And then Ethan said something that stopped my heart cold. "Dad," he whispered, "there was a man outside my window last night." I crouched down. What kind of man? He had a badge, like in the movies, but when he saw me, he just walked away. The switch flipped in my head. My military training kicked in. Patterns, anomalies. This wasn't about notes or paint colors anymore. This was someone probing. I upgraded the cameras, reinforced the window latches, and mounted a panic button under Ethan's desk. The rule was simple: press it if anyone came in uninvited. No questions, no hesitation. Rosie was too young for that. Her rule was, hide in the big closet until she heard my voice. Claire thought I was overreacting. "Honey, it's just the HOA. You know how they are, measuring lawns and fences like it's the Olympics." But that guy my son saw wasn't measuring anything. He was casing us. Weeks later, the storm hit, literally and figuratively. Claire was flying home from visiting her sister. Storms over Dallas delayed her flight. Our babysitter, Mia, called in a panic. Her brother had been in an accident. She had to leave. I had 25 minutes before I could get back from the airport. I told her to go. I trusted the plan. At 7:42 p.m., the East Gate camera caught him. Tall, tactical pants, gray windbreaker with CH Patrol partially hidden. Utility belt. Headlamp off. He moved like he'd done this before, straight across the lawn, crouching under Ethan's window. The latch hadn't been set that morning. He slid the window up and climbed inside. Ethan froze. This wasn't Dad, wasn't Mia. The badge glinted under the low light, flashlight in his teeth. My boy didn't scream, didn't panic. He reached under the, desk, hit the button, grabbed the spare phone, and slid into the closet. Door shut. Silent. The man moved through the house like it was his, checking rooms, opening doors, pausing in Ethan's room, long enough to glance at his drawings before moving on. 12 minutes later, my phone buzzed in the truck. Panic signal triggered. Perimeter breach. My gut turned to stone. I wrenched the wheel, made a U-turn so sharp I nearly clipped a pump at the gas station, floored it toward home, and called 911. The dispatcher barely finished asking for details before I was rattling them off. Kids' locations, camera feeds, gate coordinates. When I hit the driveway, the porch light was on. The front door, swinging open. My hand brushed the concealed holster. Training took over. I cleared the side of the house, every shadow, every corner. Inside, it was too quiet. On the tile floor, one sheet of paper. Violation. Notice of forced entry authorization. No seal, no signature, just the words. Secured by authority. The paper lay there like a dare. My boot heel pinned it to the tile while my eyes swept the hallway. Every instinct screamed trap. Too neat, too obvious. "Ethan!" I called, voice low. No answer. My heart thudded against my ribs as I inched toward his room. The closet door was cracked open just enough to reveal a pair of wide eyes. My boy hadn't moved a muscle. I dropped to one knee. "You did everything right," I whispered, pulling him into my arms. His fists were clenched so tight around that spare phone his knuckles were white. Rosie was next. I found her in the bathroom tub, buried under a pile of towels, clutching her stuffed giraffe like it was a life raft. She didn't cry, just blinked up at me, waiting for me to say it was over. I scooped her up and held her close enough to feel her tiny heartbeat. The red and blue of sheriff's cruisers flashed across the blinds before I even finished checking the back rooms. Two deputies stepped inside, boots heavy on the wood floor. I handed over the paper, the footage from my phone, and every detail I could recall. The older deputy's jaw tightened as he skimmed the fake violation notice. "You're not the first, sir," he said grimly. "Last 3 weeks, we've had folks dressed like HOA security showing up at homes. No warrants, no real paperwork, just walking in like they own the place. But you," he tapped the paper, "you're the first with hard proof." By morning, I was knocking on doors. It didn't take long for the stories to spill out. The River family's dog vanished the night after a warning letter. Mrs. Hauer, the sweet lady on the corner who always gave Rosie candy, had been told to take down her American flag. The next day, her prize orchids were smashed to pulp. A little girl described night people slipping through side gates without knocking. This wasn't random. This was control. I called Marcus, an old buddy from my Air Force days, now with the FBI's regional cybercrime unit. We dug into 911 call logs, HOA emails, and pulled every neighborhood camera clip we could find. A dozen incidents in 6 weeks, most never reported beyond a shrug because the homeowners didn't want trouble. Patterns emerged. Security systems mysteriously disabled days before repeat visits, and one name kept surfacing. Greg Mason, Community Security Coordinator. No law enforcement background, fired from a private security firm for unauthorized property access. 6 months after moving here, somehow put in charge of a security committee no one remembered voting for. That was enough for me. I spent the next 2 days sliding invitations under doors. No HOA letterhead, no official seal, just a time, a place, and one line. "Let's talk." When the night came, the rec center filled slowly. Neighbors lingered in the doorway, eyes darting like they expected Mason himself to appear. I didn't give a speech. Didn't need to. I just hit play. The footage rolled, a grainy figure climbing into my son's window, then a still shot of his face as he turned toward the hall camera. You could hear the air leave the room. One by one, people started talking. A man confronted in his own backyard. A couple told to remove a pride flag or face inspection. A family whose cameras went dead before an unscheduled visit. By the end of the hour, we weren't just swapping stories. We were witnesses. 24 formal statements hit the sheriff's desk by the next day. Marcus tipped off a local reporter, Lisa Tran, who ran the footage under the headline, "Fake HOA Patrol Terrorizes Cypress Hollow." The story went viral. Calls flooded the DA's office. 3 days later, Greg Mason and 2 of his crew were in cuffs. Unlawful entry, impersonating authority, fraudulent documentation. Investigators found they'd hacked into the shared neighborhood camera feeds, tracking residents in their own homes. The courtroom wasn't some TV drama, just a tired judge and a stack of evidence. But watching Mason stand there, hands cuffed, head down, I didn't feel revenge, just relief. When Claire suggested I run for the new HOA board chair, I laughed it off until my name won by a landslide. Now, Ethan sleeps with the door open again. The panic button is still there, untouched. Rosie doesn't ask why the lights stay on at night. And every time a new family moves in, sure, we bring cookies. But we also bring the truth. Because safety isn't about gates or bylaws, it's about neighbors who will look you in the eye and say, "I've got your back." And if you've ever lived in a place that looks perfect on the outside, I'll tell you, perfection is the best camouflage fear ever had. The night after Mason's arrest, Cypress Hollow felt different, quiet, but not in the peaceful way it used to. More like a stage after the curtain had dropped, with everyone waiting to see if the actors would come back out. Neighbors walked slower, porch lights burned longer, and even the kids who used to race scooters down the cul-de-sac stayed close to their yards. The illusion was shattered. I stood on my porch, arms crossed, scanning the tree line across the street. For the first time since moving here, I didn't trust the shadows. A pair of headlights crawled by. Too slow for a casual drive, too steady for a lost pizza delivery guy. I caught the license plate with my phone and sent it straight to Marcus. Old habits die hard. Later that week, the rec center hosted its first emergency HOA meeting since the scandal broke. I walked in to find folding chairs lined in tight rows, every seat filled. The air buzzed with low voices and nervous energy. At the front, the old board members sat stiff, their smiles strained. They hadn't been in on Mason's scheme, not directly, but they'd been blind enough to let him slither into power. When they tried to start with a generic statement about moving forward, people shouted them down. Voices rose from every corner of the room, families demanding answers, parents waving violation notices, a veteran neighbor slamming his fist on the table. "You let him inside our homes!" That's when Claire nudged me. "Say something." I hadn't planned to speak, but when I stood, the room quieted on its own. My voice carried without a microphone. This wasn't just about one man abusing power. This was about us trusting a system more than we trusted each other. That ends tonight. I laid it out: new bylaws for transparency, rotating committees instead of permanent ones, mandatory background checks for anyone tied to security. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every pair of eyes in the room stayed locked on me. By the end of the night, the vote wasn't even close. The board was dissolved, and I was handed the chair position by a landslide. I hadn't asked for it, but the responsibility settled on me like body armor. I didn't wear it for me, but for everyone else. That same week, Lisa Tran came by for a follow-up interview. She wanted the human side, the panic button under my son's desk, the stuffed giraffe in the bathroom tub. When she asked Ethan how he felt now, he glanced at me, then said softly, "Safe, because Dad has a plan." It hit me harder than I expected. All the years of training, all the missions overseas, and this was the battlefield that mattered most. A little boy's trust, a little girl's sleep without fear. But just as I let myself breathe, Marcus called with a warning. "You cut off the head, but the body's still out there." Mason wasn't acting alone. He had money, gear, access. Somebody higher up bankrolled this. I stared out the window. The streets of Cypress Hollow bathed in amber streetlights. The neighborhood looked calm again, almost normal. But Marcus's words echoed in my head like a drumbeat. This wasn't over. And the next move was theirs. The next move came quicker than I expected. 3 nights after Marcus's warning, I was in the garage, tightening the hinges on the reinforced side gate. The summer air was thick, humming with cicadas when my phone buzzed, a motion alert from the driveway camera. I wiped my hands on a rag and pulled up the live feed. There was no car, no person, just a small, unmarked envelope lying dead center in the concrete, like it had been placed there with precision. Every part of me said, "Don't touch it." I grabbed gloves from the workbench and approached slowly, scanning the tree line. No movement. The street was empty, but I could feel eyes on me. Inside the envelope was a single photo, black and white, grainy, but unmistakable. Ethan and Rosie sitting at the kitchen table coloring. The picture had been taken from outside, through the dining room window. My throat went dry. There was nothing else inside. No note, no demand, just proof that someone had been close enough to breathe. Beyond the glass. I didn't call Marcus yet, not until I checked the perimeter. Every camera feed, every latch, every inch of fence. Nothing looked tampered with, but someone had been here, and they'd slipped away like smoke. Later, when the kids were asleep, I showed Claire. Her hands trembled as she held the photo. I thought this was over. So did I said. But whoever's behind this, they're letting us know they're still in the game. The next morning I called Marcus. He didn't waste time. I'm coming down there. By sunset, he was sitting at my dining table with a portable forensics kit, running tests on the envelope. No prints, he muttered, but that's not a surprise. These guys know what they're doing. Guys? I asked. He looked up. Plural. Mason's crew was just the neighborhood arm. The real operation, whoever's paying for fake uniforms, hacking into camera systems and stalking families, they don't just disappear because one pawn's off the board. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Cypress Hollow was a chessboard, and I'd just been moved into the center. Around midnight, another alert buzzed. Backyard motion sensor. I froze, then pulled up the live feed. A figure stood at the very edge of the yard just outside the floodlight's reach, not moving, just watching. I zoomed in, and my stomach tightened. The figure raised a hand slowly, not waving, but holding something. A small metallic rectangle. A badge. Then they stepped backward into the darkness and were gone. It wasn't Mason. This was someone new, someone bolder, someone who wanted me to see them. Sleep was impossible after that. Every creak of the house felt louder. Every hum of the fridge sounded like footsteps. I sat in the living room with the lights off, coffee cooling in my hands, eyes flicking between the front and back camera feeds. By 4:15 a.m., the sky was turning a dull gray. I finally eased into the hallway, checked the kids, and cracked the bedroom door. Claire was asleep, but her hand clutched the blanket tight, like she'd been holding on to something in a dream. At 7 o'clock, Marcus was back at my door, this time with a second agent, a tall, broad-shouldered guy named Grant who looked like he'd been carved out of stone. We're running this off the books for now, Marcus said as they stepped in. No official reports until we know who's pulling the strings. You're our bait. I didn't like the sound of that, but it was too late to back out. We combed through the footage frame by frame. The badge the figure had shown me was real, or at least a perfect replica. The emblem matched a defunct private security firm out of Houston, one that had shut down 5 years ago, after a string of burglary charges against its employees. By noon, we were walking the neighborhood. Marcus played it casual, chatting up anyone who'd listen, while Grant quietly scanned for hidden cameras and unfamiliar vehicles. Most neighbors were eager to talk, but one house caught my attention. 2 streets over, a white ranch-style home with its blinds drawn tight. No porch decor, no kids' toys, no sign of life. But the grass was cut razor straight, and the security cameras on the corners were newer than anything I'd seen in Cypress Hollow. Rental, Grant muttered, checking his phone. Owned by a shell company. Guess who signed the lease last year? Mason? He shook his head. His cousin. We didn't knock. Not yet. Instead, we set up a mobile surveillance unit in my garage. Marcus K. built it. A couple of laptops and too much coffee. I called it a war room. That night, the first feed lit up. A black SUV pulled into the ranch driveway, headlights off. 2 men stepped out, neither one I recognized. One carried a duffel bag, the other a laptop case. They vanished inside without turning on a single light. Gear drop, Marcus said. They're restocking. We watched until nearly 2 a.m. when they finally left. But before getting into the SUV, one of them turned toward my street like he knew exactly where the camera was. He didn't smile, didn't wave, just stood there a few seconds too long, as if daring me to step outside. Grant froze the frame. He's telling you they know we're watching. I leaned back in my chair, jaw tight. Good, let them watch me back. Because if this was going to be a game, I'd play it. And I'd play to win. The next 48 hours blurred into a cycle of caffeine, surveillance feeds, and hushed conversations over the hum of the garage fridge. Marcus had rigged the monitors so we could cycle between my cameras, a few neighbors' feeds they'd willingly shared, and two long-range lenses aimed at the white ranch house. On the third night, the pattern shifted. The black SUV didn't show, but a lone figure emerged from the backyard of the ranch, hood up, face in shadow. He moved with slow, deliberate precision, checking his phone every few steps. Not scrolling, checking, like he was synced to something. Tracking app, Marcus murmured, leaning in. He's following a live feed. The man cut across two lawns without hesitation. He wasn't casing random houses. He was headed straight for mine. I killed the garage light. Grant's voice was low, controlled. Stay put until I give the word. The figure approached the east gate, the same one Mason had used. He crouched, pulled something from his pocket, and in one smooth motion, the latch clicked open. No squeak, no hesitation. My skin crawled. He didn't climb in through a window this time. He walked right up to the back door and pulled out a laminated card, white, with a gold stripe and a seal in the corner. Looked like an ID badge. He pressed it against the keypad lock. The light blinked green. Hell, I muttered. He cloned my access card. The man stepped inside, and every muscle in my body told me to storm in there and put him down. But Marcus's hand shot up, a silent order to wait. Through the interior cams, I watched him move through the kitchen, his head turning in slow arcs, not grabbing valuables, not even looking in drawers, just observing. In the hallway, he paused at the kids' bedroom doors. My stomach knotted. The rooms were empty. Ethan and Rosie were spending the night at Claire's sister's, but he didn't know that. He lingered just long enough to make my fists clench, then moved on. Grant spoke into his comm, barely above a whisper. Exit now. 2 seconds later, the man turned, retraced his steps, and walked calmly out the back door. He didn't run, didn't look over his shoulder. We slipped out of the garage like shadows, keeping to the hedges. The night air was thick, smelling faintly of rain. As he cut across my neighbor's lawn, Grant stepped into his path, badge in one hand, the other hovering near his holster. Evening, Grant said evenly. Lose your way? The man stopped. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then he smiled, a slow, knowing curve of his mouth that made the hair on my arms stand up. Just checking on the property, he said. His voice was calm, almost friendly, but there was steel under it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the badge he'd used to enter my house. HOA Security. Marcus stepped out from behind him, his tone cutting like a blade. That company shut down in 2018. Try again. The man didn't flinch. He looked from Marcus to me, eyes locking with mine like we were old acquaintances. You've made quite a mess here, he said softly. People don't like messes. People? I asked. He smiled again, and for a second I swore I saw something flicker in his expression, something darker than arrogance. Enjoy your new board position, Mr. Holloway. We'll be in touch. And just like that, he handed the badge to Grant and walked away. No resistance, no fight. He melted into the shadows like the night had swallowed him whole. Grant turned the badge over in his hand. No fingerprints. But this, he tapped the gold stripe, is an active access key. Whoever's funding these guys still has high-level tech and the codes to back it up. I watched the darkness where the man had vanished. The crickets had gone silent. Even the air felt heavier. Then we find them, I said. All of them. Marcus nodded once, the weight of the unspoken hanging between us. This wasn't an isolated threat anymore. This was organized, and the game had just gone from neighborhood politics to war. The word war wasn't just a figure of speech. It was a fact. And war needed rules. By morning, I had a strategy map laid out across the kitchen table. Not a flimsy to-do list. This was a tactical operations plan. Zones of surveillance, known entry points, timed patrol rotations. Marcus and Grant sat across from me, both leaning over the map like we were planning a raid in hostile territory. First priority, Marcus said, is identifying their chain of command. Mason was bottom rung. The guy last night, he's middle tier, but there's at least one person above him. Someone with money, infrastructure, and a reason to put their boots in Cypress Hollow. Grant pointed at the map. We narrow their routes. We can funnel them into choke points, limit movement, make them slip. I wasn't used to fighting wars in my own neighborhood, but the battlefield was familiar. No, the ground, control the high ground, cut off supply lines. The first step was the cameras, not just mine, everyone's. Over the next 48 hours, I walked door to door with a clipboard, not as board chair, but as a neighbor. I kept my pitch simple. You've seen the news, we're tightening security. You in? Most people said yes. Fear does that. Others hesitated, worrying about privacy, until I told them about the photo of my kids. Then they signed without another question. By the end of the week, we'd created a private, encrypted camera network covering almost every street in Cypress Hollow. But tech was only part of it. You can't watch every corner 24/7 without boots on the ground. So we formed what I called the Neighborhood Watch 2.0. Volunteers got rotating shifts, radios, and enough training to spot suspicious movement without putting themselves in danger. The first night on the new system, we caught something. Entered 12 a.m. South entrance camera picked up a dark sedan idling with the lights off. Two silhouettes inside. 19 a.m. A figure exited the sedan, hood up, walked to the pedestrian gate, and slipped inside without triggering the alarm. He moved low, hugging the fences, avoiding the streetlights. Not random, he was headed straight for a cluster of houses in the northwest corner. Marcus and Grant were already in the SUV when my radio crackled. "Target moving," I said, keeping my voice steady. By the time we reached the northwest corner, the figure had vanished, but not completely. Grant found fresh boot prints in the dew along the side of the Miller family's home. They'd tried the back door. The lock was scratched. "This isn't probing anymore," Marcus said. "They're escalating." The next day, I called an emergency town meeting. Not in the rec center, but in my garage. No cameras, no official notice. Just neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder under the low ceiling, the smell of oil and concrete in the air. I told them everything about the badge, the threats, the sedan, the attempted break-in. Faces hardened. People weren't just scared anymore. They were angry. That's when Mr. Alvarez, a retired cop, stood up. "You've been taking the lead, Holloway. Let us help. We've got skills. We've got time. And we're done letting these bastards think they own this place." The room erupted in agreement. For the first time since this started, I felt something shift. Fear had kept us quiet, but now anger was making us loud. And loud neighbors are hard to sneak past. That night, as I stood on my porch watching the patrols walk their routes, a breeze cut through the warm Texas air. The street was calm, still. But somewhere out there, in the dark beyond the gates, I knew someone was watching us back, calculating their next move, and I was ready for it. The confrontation came sooner than I'd planned. It was a Tuesday evening, just after sunset, when the power cut out. 1 second, the neighborhood was bathed in the soft glow of porch lights and flickering TVs. The next, darkness swallowed everything. Street lights went dead. The hum of air conditioners stopped. Even the cicadas seemed to pause. The radios on our patrol team crackled with overlapping voices. "Anyone got power?" "Negative." "Transformer blew?" I didn't believe it for a second. Power outages here were rare, and the timing was too perfect. The night patrol rotation had just switched over. Half our team was still settling in. Marcus's voice cut through the noise. "Everyone hold position. No one moves alone." I grabbed my flashlight, holstered my sidearm, and stepped into the humid night. Without the usual light pollution, the stars looked unnaturally bright, but my eyes stayed on the shadows between houses. Then I saw it. 3 faint glimmers, like reflections off glass, moving low along the fence line. Not animals. They moved too steadily. I signaled to the 2 volunteers on my block to hold back while I advanced. The glimmers drew closer until I could make out shapes. 3 figures in dark tactical gear, faces hidden behind balaclavas. No patches, no badges, no hesitation. They moved like a trained unit. I stepped into their path, flashlight beam locking on the lead man's chest. "This is private property. Identify yourselves." He didn't slow down, didn't even flinch. Instead, he shifted his weight, and suddenly my flashlight beam caught a metallic flash, something in his hand. "Hold it right there," I barked, my voice loud enough to echo across the yards. Finally, he stopped. The other two fanned out slightly, not drawing weapons, but making sure I couldn't focus on just one of them. The lead man spoke, his voice low and distorted by a mask. "You're making this harder than it has to be, Mr. Holloway." The way he said my name, it wasn't just recognition, it was familiarity. "You want something," I said, keeping my tone flat. "We want compliance," he replied. "You're the board chair now. That means you can make the rules or break them." My grip on the flashlight tightened. "If you think intimidation is going to get you—" He took one slow step forward, enough to cut me off without raising his voice. "We don't intimidate. We replace." Behind him, one of the others pulled something from a pack and dropped it at my feet, a manila envelope sealed with red tape. "Read it," the lead man said, "then decide how much you're willing to lose." Before I could respond, they backed away, slipping into the darkness between houses with the same quiet precision they'd arrived with. Marcus and Grant appeared seconds later, weapons ready, but the street was empty again. "What's in the envelope?" Marcus asked. I tore the tape and flipped it open. Inside were photos, dozens of them. My family, my house, my routines, but not just mine. Photos of neighbors, kids at the bus stop, families, in their living rooms, all taken from angles that meant one thing: inside access. "They've been everywhere," I muttered. Marcus scanned the street, jaw tight. "No, they are everywhere." I looked down at the last photo in the stack and froze. It was me, standing on my porch, taken 5 minutes ago. The meeting at the rec center ended, but my mind didn't. Long after the last chair scraped across the floor, I sat there alone, watching the reflection of the overhead lights tremble in the polished wood. I could still hear the echo of neighbors' voices, fear, frustration, and something else I hadn't heard in Cypress Hollow before: resolve. When I stepped outside, the night air was heavy, humid, the kind that makes the streetlights glow in a soft halo. But beneath that calm, I could feel it, like the air just before a storm. The fake HOA patrol would know by now that people were talking. They'd feel the pressure tightening around them. And predators don't run at the first sign of trouble. They lash out. The drive home was slow, headlights cutting across trimmed hedges and perfect driveways, each one hiding its own unease. At my house, Ethan and Rosie were asleep. Claire was curled up on the couch with a blanket, eyes red from worry. She didn't say much, just reached for my hand when I sat down beside her. That silence said enough. The next morning I started my routine, but my eyes weren't on the usual. I wasn't just walking the dog, I was scanning for cameras, for the glint of a lens where it shouldn't be. I wasn't just grabbing the mail, I was checking for another unmarked envelope. The difference now was that I wasn't the only one. Mrs. Hauer waved me over as I passed her house. "They were here again," she said quietly, glancing at the street like it might be listening. "Two men in those gray jackets. Said they were checking fence lines. I told them to wait while I called the board. They left before I could even dial." She handed me a slip of paper, folded, creased. Inside was another bogus violation notice. No signature, just the same false authority seal. By noon, Marcus had called. "I've been digging," he said, voice low, like he was calling from a war zone. "We've got more names, not just Mason, two others, same fake security committee. And get this, they're using a shared cloud account to store photos, notes, and God knows what else from inside people's homes." That hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just intimidation. They were collecting intelligence, mapping weaknesses, maybe even targeting valuables. So I made a decision. No more reacting. We were going to set the terms. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sketched it out on the kitchen table with Marcus over video call. We'd create a situation they couldn't resist, something too tempting for them to ignore. And this time, they'd walk straight into a trap, with half the neighborhood ready to witness it and law enforcement watching from the shadows. I didn't know it yet, but this was the first real step toward the night that would bring everything to a head. The night the so-called security committee would find out what happens when a community stops being afraid. We gave it 3 days. 3 days to let the bait ripen, to let the rumor slip through back fences and over hedges. I'd accidentally mentioned to a couple of chatty neighbors that I'd installed a high-end outdoor camera system and that the feed could be viewed from a poorly secured web link. Easy pickings for anyone who knew where to look. I left just enough breadcrumbs for Mason and his crew. On the fourth night, Cypress Hollow was quiet in the way a battlefield feels before dawn. Porch lights glowed like watchfires. Behind curtains, people watched without breathing too loudly. Marcus was parked 2 streets over in an unmarked SUV, his laptop glowing in the dark as he monitored every hacked feed, every comm signal they used. The sheriff's deputies were staged at the corner, headlights off. Inside, Claire sat in the living room with Rosie, pretending to read a storybook. Ethan was upstairs, his panic phone clutched but on silent. We'd rehearsed it twice. If he heard anything at his window, he'd trigger the silent alarm. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might alert them before they even arrived. Then, movement. A shadow broke from the line of hedges across the street. Another followed, taller, broad-shouldered. Both wore those gray jackets, the fake HOA patches catching the light for just a second. They didn't come to the front door. They never did. One circled toward the back, the other crouched low by the side gate. Marcus's voice crackled softly in my earpiece. Got 'em, both on camera. And wait, third one moving in from the east. I stayed still, letting them think the house was dead quiet. One of them slipped a thin tool between the gate latch. Another climbed the fence like he'd done it 100 times. I counted the seconds. 10, 15, 20. Glass whispered somewhere upstairs. Ethan's silent alarm pulsed on my watch. I moved then. Fast. Cue. He saw us into the hallway as Marcus murmured, "They're in." Deputies moving. The back door burst open, and two things happened at once. The hallway light blazed to life, and the front yard flooded with red and blue strobes. Shouts cracked through the night. Mason's voice was one of them, panicked now. Nothing like the smug figure I'd seen at HOA meetings. Deputies swarmed the house from both ends, weapons drawn, commanding them down. Within seconds, Mason and his 2 partners were face down on my tile, wrists bound in steel. Claire held Rosie tight. Ethan peered from the stairs, eyes wide but unafraid. The deputies gathered evidence bags, lockpicks, fake violation slips, even a tablet loaded with hacked security feeds from half the neighborhood. When they hauled Mason past me, our eyes met. No words, just the sharp, bitter recognition that his game was over. The charges came quick. Unlawful entry, impersonating authority, fraudulent documentation, cyber intrusion. News trucks rolled into Cypress Hollow by morning, the footage running on every local channel. Neighbors who'd been silent for months came forward. Weeks later, at the new HOA election, I didn't campaign. But when the votes were counted, my name topped the list for board chair. Guest trust is the best platform there is. Now the panic button in Ethan's room is dusty. Rosie sleeps with her giraffe and not under towels. The fences are still reinforced, but that's just habit now. And when new families move in, we don't just bring cookies, we bring the truth. Because a safe neighborhood isn't built on fear or appearances. It's built on people who look each other in the eye and say, "I've got your back."